We'll do it live!
All right, author of Ancestral Mindset, Adopting an Evolutionary Framework to Lead, Influence, and Collaborate. Author John Daniel, are you there?
Yes. Good morning, Oz. Nice to see you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, yes, absolutely. You put together a book that has all of my interest in one fell swoop, and that is HR, culture, psychology, leadership, managing people. I mean, you just brought it all in. It's a great read. Let me ask you from the beginning, one thing that sticks out of everything is the title, Ancestral Mindset. What made you come up with that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, all the topics that you mentioned come natural to me because I was a career HR executive. We spent over 20 years leading the HR for major, public corporations. And so, what I learned along the way was that there were patterns of behavior all those years. I saw behavior unfold over organizations of thousands of people, right? And in situations like mergers or change, I saw patterns of how people responded to things. And it got me curious about, there is a human nature, right? There's definitely a human nature. So where does that human nature come from? Well, it comes from our ancestral past. And as I began to do research on neuroscience and evolutionary psychology in particular, which is the framework for the book, I came to this understanding that a lot of the behaviors that people, in terms of how they respond to situations, are rooted in how natural selection shaped our brains to respond to situations in our evolutionary past. So, ancestral mindset means that a lot of our predispositions or tendencies and how we respond to things are baked into the cake. And I'll close that question with this comment that I think it'll bring it clear. In the early part and middle part of the 20th century, many psychologists and certainly philosophers going back 100 years thought when humans were born, their brains were a blank slate, and everything that we learned was a part of culture or the environment. And we now know through science that, in fact, that's not true at all. It's the old nature versus nurture question. We are born with a bunch of stuff already wired in. And that comes from our ancestral past. That's the title and the kind of core of the book.
The saying, it's in your DNA,
Yes.
it's kind of like that, right? I mean, there's things
exactly
baked into our DNA.
Yep.
And one thing I picked out through the book is you mentioned fight or flight.
Yes.
And I think we've all experienced that. And that's ingrained in us, right?
Yeah, it is. And in fact, the way you think about it, a guy named David Rock framed it up really well. He studied things from a neuroscience perspective. He said there's an organizing principle for the brain that we move towards that which rewards us and we move away from that which threatens us, which is a kind of another way of saying flight or fight. So our brains are wired when we are praised as individuals, when our status is enhanced, when we have more autonomy, more freedom to make decisions by ourselves, it puts us in a reward state. Literally, there are chemical reactions in our brain that make our responses to situations healthy. When we are facing threat states. Now, in our ancestral past, those threat states were were a saber-toothed tiger or an enemy tribe or, an environmental situation. And it increased the threat state, and that caused our body to create a bunch of chemicals that moved to our muscles and our bodies and caused us to respond. Well, in the modern world, we don't usually have, at least in modern industrial societies, physical threats to our environments as frequently as our ancestors do, but we have lots of threats in the social world, threats to our status, threats to our autonomy, threats to fairness. And so when our autonomy is removed, when our status is denigrated, when we don't feel we're being treated fairly, it creates a threat state, just like our ancestors did on the savannah in response to a threat from a predator or an enemy.
100%, 100%. I've experienced this. Like you, I've been in HR for a while. Very interested in culture. Very interested in leadership. Not just being a leader, but being managed as well.
Yes.
Because this is even though we say the word leader, we can all understand things about this book because it's not just about being a leader. It's about managing people, and we do that in our personal lives. We do that in our family. So we're either being led or leading for the most part. That fight or flight thing really stuck out to me because I've experienced it. I've been laid off before. Um,
Almost everybody has at least once in their career. I know I have too.
yeah, and that adrenaline, that fight or flight, that kicks in quick. And you never know how you're gonna respond to something traumatic, like that until it happens. And I think as it happens more and more, you get more experienced in it.
That's exactly right.
Um, but you sort of kick in autopilot, the fight or flight thing. And
Yes.
I think how we respond to that is very important. I think that is part of exactly what you're saying from the neurology of it in our brain and having experienced it before it back in our ancestral times. Well, the other thing that stuck out to me based on what you're saying is change, because things are always changing.
Right.
It's rare you're going to be at a company that isn't going through some sort of change. Change is inevitable, and we fear change. I think we flight from change. Why do you think that is?
Well, there's a chapter in the book that's about predictability. So one of the things that our brains really like is certainty. And the neuroscientist Jeff Hawkins, one of the great cognitive psychologists, is a woman named Lisa Barrett, wrote a book called 7.5 Lessons About the Brain, claim that the brain is a prediction machine. So let me tell you what that means. So our brains are designed to really be rewarded psychologically when there's high levels of predictability. So our ancestors were out on the savannah, on the plain. If there are no threats, they're moving through their day. Our brains are comfortable. If something unpredictable happens, it moves us to a threat state. You give me an example about how the brain works. Let's say somebody throws you a ball. They're 50 feet away. They throw you a ball. Without you being aware of it, your brain is automatically trying to predict, the speed of the ball, the height of the ball, where it's going to land coming to you. And without conscious awareness, your brain is acting as kind of like a prediction machine predicting that.
Yeah.
In the social world, our brains, for example, are very attuned to the emotions of other people, and our emotions are showed through our facial expressions, our body movements, whatever.
Yeah.
In the social world, as we walk into a room and we see somebody that we know and they have a big smile on their face, or they have a warm and welcoming countenance, we're in a reward state. If we see somebody that has a scowl or anger or seriousness of face, we automatically have a slight or maybe even elevated threat state. The thing that's most stressful for people, according to studies, though, is if you walk into a room and somebody has a warm and welcoming smile and then they attack you right away, that's unpredictability. And so your threat state is extremely elevated. So the thing I write about in the book, which is well documented in science, is that we crave certainty as much as we crave autonomy and fairness and enhancement of our status. Certainty is really important. So the thing to understand about change is that we have a reference point in life. We think about all the things around who our boss is, what our job is, who our friends are, how our day unfolds every day. And if somebody changes that reference point, some of the elements of that change, that induces a threat state. Now, to the point you made earlier, some of us, because of our experience, have gotten used to and because of our personality traits, are more comfortable with a higher level of change than other people are. So it is variable, but all of us have this point of where we really like certainty. And I'll give you an example I write about in the book. If you drive to work every day, the route, the streets, the lights, you could probably drive into work in 30 minutes. And on the way, think about your day, think about your plans, think about politics or whatever's on your mind, and be very comfortable because it's almost automatic. But if you're driving in another city and it's it's a route that you don't know, the traffic patterns you don't know, the lights you don't know, you are automatically, everybody's experienced this, you're in a threat state. You're paying real attention to the road. You're not listening to radio. You're not talking to anybody. You're not thinking about the day because you want to really focus on that word because you're in an unpredictable state, and that creates a threat state. Well, the good thing about that is that that gets you to your destination because your brain's responding to what it needs, which is to really focus to deal with that unpredictability. So it's a good thing in some ways, but in the social world, not having predictability is a high threat state. And that's why people say people don't like change. One caveat to that is there's lots of change that we do like. We like promotions. Sometimes we're going to move to a new house. We're going to get married. Interestingly enough, on the stress level, even really good things have high stress level because it's change.
Yeah.
Even though it's positive change, because it's unpredictable. There's elements that change. Your daily routine is changed, even though they're very, very positive. It changes the predictability of your day.
Yeah. Yeah. People struggle with this topic with change. I mean, it really throws people for a loop, especially, you know, when you're younger too.
Yep.
The way I respond now to work pressure, personal pressure, life pressures is a lot different than I would have responded to, say, 20 years ago.
Oh, no question.
We're always evolving, but this is a good cheat code right here. I remember you wrote the us versus them mentality.
Yes.
Can you speak a little bit about that? Because I think that is a major roadblock in workplace conditions and leadership and employees.
Oh, it's so important, so in our nature we have, and it's interesting. Scientists, I mean, some of the best writers on this, whether evolutionary psychologists, cognitive neuroscientists, there's no better phrase to describe this element of our brain as us versus them. Our brain recognizes, for example, babies, they show through experiments, recognize differences in a matter of milliseconds. And so we're wired to pay attention to us versus them. And this shows up in a lot of ways I saw in my career in HR, you know, where marketing is fighting with IT, or the sales team is fighting with accounting. And it creates, because they have different missions and visions, there becomes tension and differences in the way they see the world. And us, them can create a monster because we go to the dark side of us, them, rather than a more positive framing of us, them. And that's natural for our brain to go to the more negative unless it's managed appropriately. The big question that people ask is, so why is that us, them in our brain? Well, there's a great evolutionary psychologist at Harvard called Joseph Henrich, who wrote a book called The Secret of Our Success, which describes why did humans come to dominate the planet. And we used to think of it's because of our powers of rationality, and certainly that is an element to it. But he describes it as a result of our culture, our ability to come together and collaborate with others. And we could talk about culture in a few minutes, but
we definitely are going to.
Yeah. And so why us, them? Well, he gives an example of, you know, if a baseball team or a basketball team only played against itself, it wouldn't meet its maximum performance. So in our $2 million years of evolution as hominids and ultimately Homo sapiens, the group that survived competition. So natural selection wired into our brain this idea of us versus them. It's very important to recognize who us is, protect us, and, you know, fight against them, because them are going to, you know, in a world of scarcity, particularly for most of our evolutionary history, us, them created that dynamic of success for us versus them. So that's why it's wired into our brain. And it shows up in everything. I mean, there's no more commonplace now. We have the, March Madness underway, and just watch the sidelines for the people that put on a shirt with their team colors and their logos, and they cheer for their team, us.
Yeah.
And watch that team lose, and look at the faces of the people on the sideline. It's like they lost a loved one.
Yeah, it's rough.
We really care about our groups.
Yeah.
And we don't care as much about them unless there's an intervention that alleviates the us versus them. So one of the things that I learned, and there's the part of the book that talks about us them also talks how you overcome the negative aspects of us versus them. And it's really kind of fundamental. It's this idea that the only way to overcome us them is to have a facilitated intervention by the leaders to recognize that dynamic is unfolding and get the group to come together and get to know each other. Because what our brain does is not only does it observe the behavior of them, it ascribes motive. And there's a righteousness to our brains. Not only do we see the world differently and we disagree, but you're the enemy and you're against us and your motives are bad. And we see this, of course, in our society today with the right and the left. There's a righteousness to our brains. And the only way to overcome that is to get to know the other side and know, well, no, they have a different role. They have a different view of the world. They have a different view about how things should unfold. So they are different, but they're not necessarily enemy. And that takes work. Anytime you see a us-them dynamic unfolding, it's natural part of our human tendencies, and it can be facilitated away with the right tools and the right understanding of us-them as a dynamic.
Yes. I think you just hit the nail on the head, which is what's wrong with a lot of cultures in companies, company culture,
Yeah.
team culture. That because it's not only it evolves into me against them. You know what I mean?
It does.
And that breeds mistrust. And if you judge everything from that perspective, whether you're an employee or a leader, and if it's just you against everyone else in your mind, it just kills any sort of collaboration or any sort of culture, That's why a lot of us in HR, I'm sure we're familiar with team building activities.
Yeah.
That's one way you get to know each other outside of solving problems in the workplace.
Yeah.
Working toward a common goal, or as you say in the book, lead with common purpose.
Yes.
If you can get everyone on the same page with the same common purpose, then it's not an us against them. It's we're together. Well, we're together, but we're together for the betterment of our individual employees and our company as a whole. Because if we all do it together, we're all gonna theoretically achieve our goals. You're right, and fend off change,
Exactly.
which we hate, which we don't like, makes us uneasy.
Yep. The key point there is to recognize what we call framing, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's no question, because of our brains are prediction machines, and any difference from what our brains predict will create a threat state. That means that the neurochemistry of our brain changes. That was done to make sure that we're prepared for that change. Yeah. So it's a good thing, but it does create a threat state. Now, what we need to do is reframe that in our brain. That is to think about, okay, they have different views and perspectives, but it's not necessarily the enemy. We have the ability to use the neocortex of our brain, the higher level functioning of our brain, to label it and frame it in a way that's positive.
Yes.
I recognize that my body is creating chemicals that puts me in a threat state. That's a natural reaction. But these people are not the enemy, and I need to get to know them, and that will help alleviate the threat state. So people scoff sometimes, not everyone. Lots of people like team building activities, but I know some executive leaders. But it is key, the point you made. The way to overcome us versus them is what's called contact theory. It comes from a famous scientist who tried to understand prejudice and bigotry. And, that it's important to get to know the heart and soul of people, which is why a lot of team building activities get people to share stories about their parents, about their upbringing, about their values, because all of a sudden I don't see that person as the enemy. I see them as a human I can connect with.
Right.
One point I'll make, this is a little bit of neuroscience, but when we see something in the external world that we perceive as a threat, that message goes to the amygdala of our brain, which is the fear kind of emotional center of our brain. Like, it goes direct there, and that amygdala sends chemical signals through our body, which prepares us for a threat state. It bypasses the neocortex, which is the higher level functioning of our brain. Now, and what's important to know about that is the way we overcome that messaging That is, the threat state comes to the amygdala sends chemicals to our body that creates a threat state, is to use the neocortex to say, wait a second, I'm a conscious, rational human being. I can see this is kind of an unnatural situation, but these people are not the enemy. This situation can actually be positive. And so we're reframing it. And what that does, interestingly enough, is the brain then changes the chemical signals in our body to alleviate or lessen the threat state. There's a bunch of chemicals in there. Some people we know about that, that are naturally released in threat states. And then there are things like, dopamine and serotonin, which are, reward neurochemicals that then alleviate our threat state. That's kind of the neuroscience. I write a little bit about it in the book. I don't overdo it with the neuroscience because I'm not an expert at it, but I know enough to let people know that the stuff's baked into the cake, right? It's not something, it's a natural part of our human nature.
Yeah, it's important to understand, and once again, cheat code. Unfortunately, I've learned all this. I guess you could say through the school of hard knocks.
Yeah.
Not understanding what's going on in my brain, not understanding why I'm having anxiety attacks, not understanding why my skin gets hot, and I can't think straight. Because of pressure at work. Things like that, health, which we can get into as well. But through learning, reframing it, compartmentalizing it, some people would say, it's not as easy as it sounds.
Yeah.
It can really take over.
Yep. Let me give you an example. I think
go ahead.
in life. I mean, reframing involves something called labeling, right? So here's an example. My son and daughter-in-law, they're both really much aware of this idea of, because of their upbringing, the idea that, children have emotions, like they don't have emotional control. So, my grandson, Robbie, is playing a game and he loses. And he gets upset and he kind of throws the pieces around because that's a natural kind of response to a kid. When something doesn't go their way, their emotions take over. Their amygdala kind of controls it. And by the way, our neocortex, the prefrontal cortex in particular, the part of the brain with the highest level of thinking, doesn't fully develop toward 25, which is why, teenagers take a lot of risks because they don't have this thing to offset the risk. But anyway, my children teach Robbie, okay, Robbie, stop for a second. What are you feeling? Well, when they help him, are you frustrated? Are you angry? Yes. Why? Well, because I lost the game. Okay. So, when you play the game, you're not always going to win. That's called frustration. What your experiences are frustration. So now they've labeled this thing and it starts to calm him because now he can learn to control his emotions.
Yeah.
In the next couple of games, Robbie loses, but now he immediately feels the stress or the anxiety like you and I feel when we lose a pickleball game. But based on our experience in life, this is not the end of the world. We're going to have another game. We didn't play as well. That's labeling, which that allows the neocortex, particularly the prefrontal cortex, to have that in the brain, and it changes the chemical system in our body. So that's kind of the mechanics of how it works. Labeling is really important. When you're feeling emotions, when I feel a threat state, for example, okay, what am I feeling? Why am I feeling it? Label it. It automatically has a positive it helps us have a positive response to the situation. It doesn't solve it, but it helps.
Yeah, it's interesting you said that and you brought up pickleball because, as you know, I've avid racquetball player in my past, competitive, and now pickleball. And one thing that's taken me a long time to do is play relaxed and calm. And it's like a point happens, you net it, you make a bad shot, like in golf, you just move on to the next shot. I play better when I'm not self-critical, when I'm relaxed, when I bring myself down,
Yep.
when I don't show a lot of emotion, which I want to get into because emotion is what really messes with us. Leaders, just what you're talking about with your grandson. So that I perform better, even at work when I'm relaxed, when I'm not allowing those natural instincts to kick in, fight or flight, anger, over emotional, less rationality.
Right, right.
I'm able to see that now. I'm able to put it into practice. Even as my job was just primarily creative early in my career, I hated critiques in school. I didn't like anyone telling me my work is not good for whatever reason.
Oh God,
You
it's
know?
true for most of us. Yeah.
Yeah, like as an artist, and that side of my brain rejects criticism. And it took a while for me to get comfortable with criticism to the point where I'm at in my career now, where I take criticism in, and I realized over time, even though this person, this director, this manager, this VP, whatever, they may not be an artist like I am, but that doesn't mean what they're saying as a user and user experience is not legit. You know what I mean? And then when I adopted that attitude, I mean, it happens every week. I'll put in the design. I'm like, this is it. I like it. This is good. They should like it. And we should move on. They come back with feedback, and I'm reluctant. I was going to take more time, whatever. But I do it, and I realize over time that the end product is better with other people's input.
Yeah.
That's super important, and it makes you coachable.
Yes, it does. Well, I write about this in the book. Our brain is primarily social. I mean, it's not rash. Well, the original philosophers and historians were trying to answer the question, why did Homo sapiens come to dominate the planet? And our species is actually called Homo sapiens, which comes from the Latin wise man, right? The view was that because of our powers of rationality, our ability to solve problems, be innovative, well, that's what helped us be successful. Well, Henrik and others argue, well, no, it's actually our ability to collaborate and cooperate and create culture and accumulate knowledge and share that knowledge with the larger group. It's our social nature that is most important. So to go back to what the point you were trying to make, our brains are wired to care deeply about what other people think of us.
Yeah.
It's very important for us to stay connected to a group, to be liked and respected by the group. And the reason for that, in 2 million years of hominid and Homo sapien evolution, getting kicked out of the group meant one thing: you didn't survive, right? So your genes didn't think about natural evolution by natural selection. Your genes passed on to the next generation. Those people that got kicked out of the group aren't our ancestors because they didn't live long. The people that stayed connected to the group, that cared about others, that supported others, that responded to criticism or to negativity, worked to overcome that so they can stay connected to the group. So our brains care deeply about what other people think of us, particularly people higher in status. So criticism is very hard for us, which is why we need to reframe it, which is what you have done as an adult, is to recognize that criticism is hard for all of us because we don't like to be rejected or not accepted, but we can reframe it. Well, wait a second, this is positive. Now, sometimes criticism is negative, is an enemy trying to bring you down, trying to lower your status. You'll know what that is and you could deal with. But most criticism, most feedback is good for you. People that are most healthy are people that maintain high levels of positive relationships with the groups they're involved in. If you take a person that in their 30s or 40s, stays isolated, has no friends, isn't married, they have no source of feedback to their behavior. So they get worse and worse in terms of their ability to respond because there's no growth. There's nobody giving them feedback, which, while painful, makes us better, right?
Yeah. And this goes into leadership, and it honestly goes into bad leadership too. And I'll get leaders into that. But when you were saying that, it's often how criticism is delivered. Like criticism, we see it as a negative word, but it's really not.
The same with conflict. It's labeling it as conflict, criticisms, that's bad. If our brains were like computers, it would, like AI now, the way IL is built is it constantly is getting information, and I'm on Chat GTP, and that darn thing is out free there now because it's using feedback from its readers to constantly update its knowledge and improve. If our brains were designed not through natural selection, the way it was, it would be designed to say conflict and criticism are good because it helps us better and resolve it. But
Yeah.
our evolution was about staying connected to the group, having people respect, trust us, and belonging was important. So that's why this thing is kind of out of arraignment with modern world. It's our brain through 2 million years. It was really important to stay connected to your group, because if you didn't survive, you didn't pass on your genes to the next generation. So that's why it is the way it is. We have the power of rationality, though, the power of labeling, the power of reframing, then to put it in the right perspective.
Yeah, absolutely, without a doubt. When you were saying that, it was taking me to my marriage, and marriage in general. I can't tell you how much better my marriage is now because of conflict.
Oh, yeah.
The conflict in our personal conflict, whatever it is, financial, raising children, emotional, all that stuff. We can say we're stronger now because we've had conflict.
Yes.
And through the conflict, we've communicated to each other what we normally just wouldn't communicate over a cup of coffee.
Yep.
And we're both love each other, and we want our marriage to last forever. It's ugly. Don't get me wrong.
Well, it can be, yeah.
Yeah, it can get ugly, but through it's made us stronger. It's made our marriage stronger because we've both been able to learn from the conflict and listen and then act.
Yep. Well, conflict comes from 2 Latin words, which is going to strike together. And, there will inevitably, in a business partnership, in a marriage, in a friendship, there'll be conflict. And what happens is if you want to have a positive relationship, you listen to the other person's perspective, you try to understand, and that dialogue creates intimacy. And that intimacy, once you get over the stress of the actual disagreement, the conflict, the debate, which can raise your threat state because of our wiring, it ultimately resolves itself by either acceptance of the disagreement, but being able to work together around it. And it creates a level of intimacy, which is why some of the best, romance, the physical intimacy comes after a really tough conflict. Very common for people to report that they felt the most physical rewards and comfort because after a big fight, right? Because it brings you together.
Yeah.
There's a person that I follow by a psychologist by the name of John Gottman, who studies marriage. And he actually was able to predict, after observing couples in real situations, which marriages would be successful and which ones weren't. And the ability to resolve conflict positively is one of the elements of highly successful marriages. In fact, Gottman is best known for what's called the Gottman ratio. And the Gottman ratio is this idea that in a relationship, there has to be 5 times the expression of 5 times more positive feedback than 1 negative. And he observed couples that had a 1-to-1 or a negative relationship. In other words, more negative comments, particularly condemnation and contempt. If he saw contempt by one party in a relationship, it easily could predict separation or divorce.
I can see that.
To have the positive to the negative. If you only have a 2-to-1 ratio, a 3-to-1 ratio, it's going to deteriorate the relationship. It's very famous. It's called the Gottman ratio. The actual science is 4.87 to 1 or something like that, but it's commonly known as the 5-to-1 ratio. And so I think about that consciously in my own. If I have an observation to Les, like, hey, I didn't like how you did that, or I got to say 5 more things. If you come to our house, posted on the refrigerator or a bunch of positive comments I read out to her. Hey, you look fantastic today, or best wishes on your talk today at the chamber, because I know you're going to do a great job. That's a way to kind of elevate the ratio in a very simple way. A little post-it notepads left behind really helps improve a marriage. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't overdo it, but that's just an example of something you could do to improve that ratio.
No, yeah, it makes sense. I mean, I could tell you many of our conflicts in our marriage and argument is we hear more negative than we do positive.
Yep. Well, our brains are tuned in to solve problems, to see things that are not right, and automatically focus on that to resolve it. All right. And we look past all the things that are going right. It actually takes conscious effort to do that because our brains are paying attention to that which creates a threat state to us. And so, it's just really important that you pay attention to this thing. Is a lot of our behaviors are triggered by non-conscious thoughts. We're not even aware of it.
Yeah.
And just bringing to awareness. There's one scientist that studied this, and our brain processes 11 million bits of information. I have to find a bit in a specific way. 11 million bits of information every second. You're looking out mostly through the visual field, but also hearing, smell, and whatever. Our brains, according to scientists, are only consciously aware of 40 bits. Like, there's a bunch of stuff going on as we view the world. We look at facial expressions. We look at the physical environment.
Yeah.
We interpret things, and we're not even aware of it. And that triggers behavior that somebody else has to point out to us. If you're in a positive relationship, you're going to get that feedback. It's going to go, oh, geez, that's really helpful to me. I didn't even know I did that, or I wasn't even aware of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's where you have to listen and not take things personally.
Right.
And I think that taking things personally is a weakness of us.
Yep.
As a human race, and how we handle our emotions. John, I wanted to talk about another thing that jumped out at me in your book, is the term psychological safety.
Yeah.
And that's a big one. That's a big one. I hear that talked about a lot now than, say, 20 years ago, earlier in my career.
Right.
It has a lot to do with everything.
Right. So, a professor at Harvard by the name of Amy Edmondson is best known for a paper that she wrote some time ago, where in her field work, she really popularized the notion of psychological safety. I don't think she claims credit for first coining the term, but she certainly gets credit for making it a kind of a popular jargon in business. Amy Emerson just does fabulous work. One of the books that I read in preparation for my writing was called The Fearless Organization. And what's great about that book, it gives lots of documented examples. For example, Wells Fargo, Volkswagen, and other companies that did not experience psychological safety, and the $1 billion of capital, of market loss, capital that they lost as a result of the absence of psychological safety in the organization. So to kind of put some background around it, think about the earlier part of my comments where we talk about our brain as primarily a social brain. Yeah, it cares deeply about what other people think of us. It's wired to connect to culture. It responds to, and its biggest rewards, psychological rewards, the increase in dopamine that comes from our relationships with other people. So we're a highly social brain. And our brains work really well when they're in a reward state, which I talked about earlier, the versus reward state.
Yeah.
Well, if you go back in history, this takes it back a little bit further. Leadership, a couple of thousand years ago, after the agricultural revolution, people began to form civilizations. Like, instead of small hunter-gatherer groups through most of our 2 million years of evolution, it's only been in a couple thousand years that we created civilizations. Now, the first groups that got together that were led by somebody other than a tribal head were two things: the plantation and the military. And leadership is and those are involuntary. I mean, people don't want to work on a plantation; they don't want to be slaves, and they're certainly conscripts. And so the way to lead was through sticks and carrots. Punish.
Yeah. You have that.
That leadership theory passed even through the Industrial Revolution, where even in my early days of my career, leaders thought of behaviorism as a way to lead. You reward good behavior and you provide sticks. It's sticks and carrots, which I write about in the book.
Yeah.
And that's still a little bit even today, thousands of years later, it's still a big part of many people's leadership theory. Well, in the middle part of the 20th century, and certainly towards the later part, as we began to understand the brain, its evolutionary roots, we began the neuroscience of the brain, we began to understand that, in fact, the way to lead is to give people autonomy, to have them more empowered in their work, and to put them in not risk states. In other words, we used to threaten people. If you don't do this, there are going to be consequences. And what you know about the brain is, okay, when you're working the assembly line and you're just stamping something, or if you're working on the farm and you're just picking something, threat states don't impede your ability to do your job. I mean, uh, but when you're in a knowledge economy and your brain has to be creative, it has to solve problems, it has to build relationships, it has to collaborate.
Yeah.
Being in a threat state is terrible because the brain doesn't work very well in a threat state. So
No.
Amy Edmondson and others began to see that, wait a second, that threats, sticks and carrots, because carrots are just another form of a stick. You know, it's manipulative and it's controlling. Okay, if you do this, I'm going to give you a reward. People will work hard when they are psychologically rewarded, when they're part of a group, when they have purpose and meaning, and they're connected to people with that purpose. And so psychological safety is this notion as a leader, my primary job is to set a goal, create purpose, and create psychological safety. One of the interesting things is I think it was Google that was interested in studying, because it's a massive organization, all the work, it's a knowledge economy, all the work is done in teams, and they call it Project Aristotle. They were interested in studying why are some teams successful and why are others not successful. And interesting, one of the biggest things, in addition to things I mentioned, having clear goals, having purpose and meaning, the teams that seemed to do the best were teams that reported high levels of psychological safety. Psychological safety means that I can raise an issue. I can come up with an idea. I can push back against my boss without threats of being intimidated or threatened. And high levels of psychological safety correlate to high levels of success. I mean, let's give me an example. Scientists do simple experiments where they'll take two groups of people, randomly selected. They'll put them in a room and they'll ask this group, hey, solve a puzzle or, do something innovative to create something. And in one group, they'll have they'll facilitate a positive reward state. The facilitator will be warm and welcoming. They'll do a little team building exercise to get people to know each other, and then they'll set them upon the task. In the other group, they might not induce a threat state, but they'll just have a very cold facilitator. They won't do any, they won't do any team facilitation. They'll just give them the problem, and where this is going. Yeah. Which group is going to solve the problem, do the math problem, fix the puzzle, or be more innovative first? Clearly the group that has had that, psychological safety elevated by building relationships and so forth and so on. And so it's a really important concept. It's in the book because it's so much a part of our nature, our social nature. We need to be, and if you want to be a leader, your job is not to be the smartest guy in the room. It's not to make all decisions. It's to create a group that has a common purpose and goal, clearly accountable, and give them the autonomy to solve problems and create psychological safety. And I'll add one caveat to that. There's some work on bad apple research. The worst thing that could happen in a group is to have a bad apple. Somebody that is negative, competing with people, that stabs people in the back is a phrase we use.
Yeah, I've seen it.
That'll destroy a group. And
I'll destroy
one bad apple is way worse in terms of group performance than any other element. And we're not talking about a person that's not a good performer. There are lots of people that are not really good at their job, but they're not negative in terms of their personality. Anybody that's not able to do their job is just a performer that needs to be managed, either coached up or managed out because it's not a good fit. I had a person that was highly competent in their job, really good at it. But she was so competitive with her she worked to manipulate people against each other and create cliques that she destroyed the group, and she had to go even though she was outstanding at her job.
Yeah. I've seen it too often, unfortunately. And it is a culture killer, as I like to call it. And it is a culture killer, when it comes from the leader, or when it comes from the top. But yeah, I totally agree. And I've worked at a few agencies, and there is, you talk to anyone that's worked at an agency, it's very cutthroat. It's very cover your own ass, so to speak, throw people under the bus. It's agency culture is not my favorite place.
Yeah.
And I have scars from it, and I work with people who have scars from it, which is interesting because my current career and place is not that. which means I work at a place that has a good culture.
Right, right.
And then culture can shift from like the entire organization to separate teams, each team.
That's right.
Yeah, I think hiring practices now should evolve into less of a resume and less of this, who cares if you have a master's degree or whatever. Can you fit our culture that we have established and are trying to establish,
Right.
which is, here's our common purpose, here are our values, here are how we do things here. And then if you're interviewing someone who might have all these accomplishments and it's very talented and great, but if you can tell right off the bat that this person has an ego, this person is not willing to hear other people's opinions or criticism, all those things, then this person is not, I would rather coach up, as you said, and hire a person that's a personality fit that fits the culture than I would someone who's more accomplished, who is not going to fit the culture. Because you're right, one person on a team can ruin everything.
Yep, they absolutely can.
I've seen it happen too many times.
Oh, isn't it?
It really is. It really is. And I like the fact that we are here in terms of psychological safety, and that should be everywhere. That should be in your home. That should be in your workplace. It's preached a lot. I don't think it's practiced a lot, and that could be our evolutionary path that we're on, as you state. We're getting there. We're not there yet.
Yep.
I've seen good leaders. I've worked for good leaders, and I've worked for bad leaders, quite frankly. And
I have as well.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate that I've actually worked for more bad than I have good. And I think a big part of that is ego,
No, that's no question. Yep. A person that's unhealthy in terms of their own appreciation for their own status, their own personal comfort, is not a good leader. I mean, they may be, it's a classic case of the person that's a great salesperson because of their drive and their passion and their drive to be successful and to achieve goals. You put them in a leadership role and they're terrible. There's a leadership style called pace setting, which is one of there's autocratic leadership, there's pace setting, there's supportive, there's democratic, there's different kinds of leadership styles that you can document. I think a book called The Primal Leadership lays those out. And that person that's a highly driven person can become a pace setter leader. And that's a terrible leadership style. And because it undermines psychological safety, it puts people in a state of constant threat because it's all about competition and winning, when it should be more about, no question, you want to achieve goals, but those goals should be achieved in a collaborative way. The one thing about culture that's important is if you grew up in a culture and it's a positive culture, has high levels of psychological safety, there's clearly demonstration the company cares about people in the community and the customers, and you end up working for a leader who's not a great leader. Leadership, your personal leader is the most important element of your happiness and success in an individual job.
Absolutely.
Good leaders, keep people, bad leaders drive them out.
Yeah.
You're in a broader culture. Let's say you're at FedEx or First Horizon, which have good cultures, and you end up working for kind of a leader who's not that good. You have the cultural perspective. Well, listen, you work to get out from underneath that leader. But if you come into an organization that has a great culture and you work for a bad leader, you have none of that perspective. You're more likely to leave that organization because you don't understand that that's an outlier in the culture. And so cultures can help save bad leaders. But let's face it, our individual experience and our satisfaction with our job every day is based primarily on our leader. Also included in that is our relationship with the people we work with, the job content. Is the job content rewarding? Are we matched well to it? But leader is the single most important dynamic. And your point would be that, in fact, creating psychological safety is one of the key parts of being an effective leader.
100%, 100%. And I can think of times when we're talking about a little while ago, the carrot and leading with fear, intimidation. I've experienced that. it is brutal. You know, when someone in an organization is so untouchable, where they can run things and do what they want and intimidate people and yell at people in boardrooms and have a boardroom full of people that are just fearful of their leader and are doing everything they can to be seen in a good light by this leader and not be on the receiving end of their ire, to the point where they're backstabbing everyone, because I've seen it more times than not, and that's unfortunate.
Well, one thing I'll make a point here. There's a psychologist, actually a neuroscientist. He also engages in psychology, but he's literally a neuroscience. Him and his wife coined the term social pain. So they found something interesting. You know, if you touch a hot stove, that'll send a message to your brain to say, take away your finger because it's going to cause damage to your skin, right? So pain is an important feeling because it protects our body, right? It tells us, okay, we got to get that fixed or we're not going to be right? So that's a part of the brain that actually is engaged when we feel pain. Well, Lieberman and his wife found out that rejection, social rejection, criticism activates a part of the brain. This is exactly the same part of the brain that is activated when we touch a hot stove. Social pain is the equivalent of physical pain. And that's why you see words like threw him under the bus, stabbed him in the back. They're vivid emotional phrases are, a part of our culture, a part of our vocabulary at work, and they have an emotional intensity to them because you're activating social pain. When you have a boss that criticizes and puts people from, you're experiencing a lot of social pain. And let's face it, when you have a headache or you have pain, you're not able to think very well. Your brain's not high functioning. No. Well, you're activating the same darn part of your brain when you have social pain, when you have physical pain. It's just not good for the brain.
No, it's really not. It's not good for production. It's not good for creativity. And it's a shame that these leaders didn't see that, you know. And I'm not going to name names, although I'd like to. But they needed this. All leaders need this book, and fathers like myself and husbands. And it really is an eye-opening, unique book and perspective. You know, you can go into Kinko, I'm showing my age, Kinko's, and you'll see all these leadership books, and this is different. And I like it. I like the psychological aspect of it. And if you get to know yourself, whether you're being led or you're a leader, if you get to know yourself and some of these things that you're describing that are baked into our DNA, as we said in the beginning, you can become more successful and be part of a common purpose or lead with a common purpose, you know? Right. And I think this book is this is not your typical leadership book, you know? And I commend you for it. I want to know what was your aha moment that led you to this book? Like, was there an aha moment where you were like, I've got to do this?
Yep, that actually was. I had, I thank you for those comments, and I think that's consistent with what I hoped people would say about the book, because I looked to see if there was quite a book like that, a practicing HR leader who can combine the best research and science. So I read a lot of books written by academics that explained either our brain or evolutionary psychology, and they were great books. I mean, I really was, I loved them. But I tried to combine practical advice for people that are trying to, for leaders and for others, like you say, parents, anybody that's trying to influence other people. So, and as you see in the book, there's hundreds of footnotes from the best scientists, the best psychologists or whatever. And, you know, as I mentioned earlier, that aha moment came to me in 2002. At that point, I'm already a senior HR executive. I'm observing all these behaviors. I'm experiencing life at the top of an organization. An HR executive has a really unique experience because they see, you know, not just their own data from their team and their own experiences one-on-one with peers and individuals. You see thousands of people, you know. You see, exit interview data, you see survey data, you see focus groups, like you see a lot. In 2002, I read a book by one of the leading public intellectuals in America, a man by the name of Steven Pinker at Harvard, called The Blank Slate, subtitle, The Modern Denial of Human Nature. And in that book, Pinker, one of the best known, like I said, academics in the country, basically the case that we're not born with a blank slate. There's a bunch of stuff wired in, and this is the stuff that's wired in there that you'd want to know if you're trying to influence people. And so as the years went by, I was also influenced by a guy named David Rock, who took a neuroscientist perspective to write a number of papers and a book. One's called The Brain at Work, that describes, how our brain responds to situations. And those two were very influential. What I did was I started thinking about those concepts when I was actually leading cultures and creating cultures. And I'm proud to say, First Horizon had been recognized by multiple organizations for being a great place to work. And I think it was a part of not only the legacy I inherited when I came there, but also the work I did and the experience I had understanding how to create great cultures.
Awesome. I think culture is, like I said before, I mean, I'm really into culture. I'm really into observing companies and how their culture is, what they preach on the front end and what they actually do, which sometimes, unfortunately, it's not what they preach. And sometimes with good companies, like you mentioned, FedEx, First Horizon, it is. Yep. I want to finish, to wrap us up, on one thing that you mentioned earlier, AI.
Yeah.
Once again, change, perceived threat, possibly. You can go a lot of different places with AI, but it's here. We're kind of on the front end of it. I would say a little past the front end of it. I think 2 years ago was probably when it started, but now you're seeing it baked into
right.
our phones, our search engines. It wasn't, it's a lot easier now than it was 2 years ago to utilize AI.
Yep.
I don't see it as a threat. Certainly people's jobs and certain occupations are going to be replaced,
Right.
But once again, it's how you frame that. I think it's a tool.
Yep. No question.
And I think that we're going to need leaders, and leadership is going to be more important now than ever because of the emergence of AI. AI is not a leader. It's not human. It's artificial. So you have to lead AI. You have to lead. Leadership and leading is going to be an important aspect of us moving forward.
Yeah.
Whether you have a job where you're an official leader or you're on a team or as an individual contributor. Would you agree with that?
I absolutely, I'm not an expert at AI, but like being a person that pays attention to what's going on in the world, which I think is important if you're going to be a strategic thinker. I'm in the camp that AI is like every other tool we've developed, just added at a higher level of dimension because of its just amazing abilities. When the calculator was first introduced, the argument was we can't have kids use calculators because they won't know how to do math. I mean, well, there are all kinds of fears. I mean, we could create a lot of jobs by just getting rid of word processors and hiring thousands of people to type, right? And it's moving backwards. I mean, what we've seen with the introduction of technology over the last 100 years, and there's lots of papers and great books written about this, they actually create more jobs. Involving the highest level capabilities of humans. I mean, the ability to innovate, to collaborate, to solve complex problems. Our brains can do things that lots of AI will be able to replicate, but not at everything. And maybe one day, but we're still far, far away from that. So I certainly see, though, unlike calculators and word processing systems and so forth, AI has a dimension to it that requires it to put boundaries around it, probably through some regulatory bodies. And we have to be careful that we don't stifle innovation with that. We could overdo it. But I think the OECD countries, the modern industrialized societies will come up with the right boundaries around that won't stop innovation. But I see it as an ability to elevate productivity and wealth in society. We don't have a scarcity mindset. Through 2 million years, our brains evolved in a world of scarcity because everything came from the ground was limited. AI furthers the idea that there's boundless sources of wealth. It's knowledge and intelligence, which is a public utility, which there's an unlimited capacity for new knowledge, unlike the limited capacity for petroleum or coal or any of the precious metals. There's no limits to it. So it will enhance wealth.
Right.
It won't destroy wealth.
Yeah, I agree. That's a great way to finish this off on a positive note. Yeah, I think not the knowledge is going to be there through AI, but I think some intangibles are what's gonna, what we're going to be looking for in the workplace moving forward, because the knowledge is easily, gotten from AI. The internet didn't kill us. We adapt and we evolve, and I think AI is going to be another part of that. Where can you get Ancestral Mindset?
Well, if you go on Amazon, type in the word Ancestral Mindset in the search, it'll take you right to the book page. If you're in the Memphis greater region, you could go to the independent bookstore Novel. They have copies of it. I did a book signing there. And you could also get it on barnesandnoble.com. Just type in Ancestral Mindset. The easiest is Amazon or Novel if you want to grab a copy of it right away.
I will put those in the links below in the description.
Great. Thank you.
John, you hit a home run with this. Anyone out there who is interested in culture, leadership, psychological safety, organizational psychology, HR, this has research, human behavior. You really wrapped it up and you have it all in here. I think it's really a good book and a good read for anyone, not just leaders, but especially leaders. Good luck with it. I hope more and more people see it, read it, and get exposed to it, because this is a cheat code.
It is. It is. That's a good way to say it.
And more importantly, when are we playing pickleball next? All right, John. It's been a pleasure. I appreciate it. And I'll see you on the courts.
All right. Thanks, Nos.
Thank you.